3 words shattered my world. "You're not invited anymore." My stepmother, Margaret, delivered this verdict with the same cold smile she had perfected over 15 years of marriage to my father. Standing in the doorway of what used to be my childhood home, I watched my entire family nod in agreement. My father, my 2 half-sisters, even my grandmother, who raised me. They had made their decision. I was officially cut out of the family inheritance meeting, the annual Christmas gathering, and apparently their lives. I simply nodded and walked away. They had no idea what I was about to uncover. Before we dive into this family revenge drama that changed everything I need to know, where are you watching from? This story gets intense, so if you are ready for some serious family justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will blow your mind. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this family betrayal backfired spectacularly. My name is Savannah Rivers, and until that moment, I thought I understood my place in the family hierarchy. Sure, things had been different since Dad married Margaret when I was 12, but I never imagined they would completely erase me from the family legacy. Walking back to my car that October afternoon, I felt numb. 27 years old, and suddenly, I was nobody's daughter. The drive home gave me time to think. Something about their coordinated response felt rehearsed, planned. Margaret's smug expression, the way my half-sisters Emma and Sophie avoided eye contact, and most disturbing of all, Dad's guilty fidgeting. This was not a spontaneous family decision. They had been planning this. That evening, I called my grandmother's house. Nana Williams had practically raised me after my mother died when I was 8. She had always been my safe harbor in the chaos of our blended family dynamics. "Nana, what happened today? Why did you not defend me?" Her voice cracked.
"Savannah, honey, there are things you do not know. Margaret showed us documents. She said you had been stealing from your father's business accounts." My blood turned to ice. "Stealing, Nana? I have never touched a penny that was not mine. I work at the nonprofit downtown. I make $35,000 a year and live in a studio apartment. What could I possibly steal?" She had bank statements, transaction records. Your name was on everything. Margaret said you had been funneling money through fake vendor accounts for years. She said you owed the company over $200,000. The audacity left me speechless. Margaret was not just cutting me out of family events. She was systematically destroying my reputation with elaborate lies and forged documents. But why now? What had changed? I spent the next week in a fog trying to process the betrayal. My father would not return my calls. My half-sisters blocked me on all social media platforms. Even family friends started treating me differently around town. Margaret's poison was spreading fast through our small community. Then I remembered something crucial. 3 months ago, Dad had asked me to notarize some business documents because I was a certified notary through my nonprofit work. I had signed and stamped about 15 papers without reading them carefully. At the time, I trusted him completely. Now I wondered what exactly I had notarized. I drove to the county courthouse and requested copies of all recently filed documents bearing my notary seal. The clerk handed me a thick folder, and my heart sank as I reviewed the contents. Loan agreements, partnership, modifications, property transfers. My notary seal was on documents that restructured Dad's entire business empire. Documents that coincidentally gave Margaret significant control over assets that used to belong to our family trust. The most damning document was a partnership agreement that dissolved the original family trust and created a new entity with Margaret as the primary beneficiary. According to these papers, I had willingly notarized my own disinheritance. My father's business, the family home, even Nana's cottage that my grandfather had built with his own hands,
Everything now legally belonged to Margaret's newly formed limited liability company. But here was the problem with Margaret's plan. She was smart enough to forge my signature on financial documents, but she was not smart enough to understand notary law. As a certified notary, I was required to keep detailed records of every document I stamped. My notary journal showed exactly what I had actually notarized for Dad 3 months ago, and it was not these documents. The papers in Margaret's possession bore my genuine notary seal, but the contents had been completely altered after I signed them. This was not just inheritance theft. This was sophisticated document fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse of my grandmother. Margaret had committed multiple felonies, and she had been stupid enough to use my notary seal as evidence. I made copies of everything and started building a case file. Margaret thought she was clever, but she had made one critical mistake. She had stolen from someone who worked at a nonprofit legal aid clinic. I knew exactly which lawyers specialized in financial fraud cases, and I knew which prosecutors took elder abuse seriously. More importantly, I knew Margaret was not working alone. The sophistication of this scheme suggested professional help. Someone with legal knowledge had helped her create these documents. Someone with access to official letterheads and databases had helped her forge bank statements. This was a conspiracy, not a solo operation. I started making phone calls. The first lawyer I contacted was Rebecca Morrison, a former prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. Her office was downtown 3 blocks from my nonprofit clinic. I had referred abuse victims to her before, so she agreed to meet with me immediately. Rebecca reviewed my evidence with the focused intensity of a detective examining a crime scene. After 2 hours, she leaned back in her chair and whistled softly. "Savannah, this is not just simple fraud. This is organized financial crime. The level of document sophistication suggests your stepmother had professional help, probably someone with legal training and access to document production software." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about your father's business attorney, who handles his legal affairs." I felt my stomach drop. "Gerald Henderson. He has been Dad's lawyer for 20 years. He handled my parents' estate planning, the business incorporation, everything." Rebecca nodded grimly.
Gerald Henderson has been on our radar for 2 years. We suspect he has been helping wealthy clients hide assets from divorce proceedings and estate taxes, but we have never been able to build a solid case against him. Until now. She explained that Gerald Henderson's law practice had been flagged by the State Bar Association for unusual document filing patterns. Multiple clients had reported discrepancies between documents they thought they had signed and documents that appeared in court filings. But no one had been able to prove deliberate fraud because the victims typically discovered the problems years after the fact, when evidence was harder to reconstruct. "Your notary journal is the smoking gun we have needed. It proves Henderson backdated and altered documents after they were legally notarized. That is, disbarment territory plus federal fraud charges." Rebecca contacted the district attorney's office that afternoon. Within 48 hours, we had a meeting scheduled with prosecutor Sarah Kim, who specialized in financial crimes against elderly victims. Sarah Kim was exactly what I had hoped for. Thorough angry about elder abuse and unimpressed by wealthy defendants who thought money could buy immunity from consequences. "Mrs. Rivers, we have been trying to build a case against Gerald Henderson for 3 years. Your evidence gives us everything we need to move forward. But I want you to understand what you are signing up for. Your stepmother and your father's attorney are going to fight this aggressively. They have resources. This will get ugly before it gets better." "How ugly?" "They will try to discredit you. They will claim you are a disgruntled family member making false accusations. They will hire expensive defense attorneys who will drag this case out for months, maybe years. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny and stress?" I thought about my grandmother living in fear of losing her home. I thought about my father, who was either a victim or a co-conspirator, but was definitely being manipulated by Margaret.
I thought about Emma and Sophie, who were too young to understand they were watching their father commit financial suicide. I am prepared. What do we do first? Sarah Kim smiled for the first time during our meeting. First, we gather more evidence. I want you to document every interaction you have had with your family since this started. I want you to request copies of all business filings from the Secretary of State's office. And I want you to contact every family member who might have information about Margaret's financial activities. Even my father, especially your father. We need to determine if he is a victim or a co-conspirator. Either way, his cooperation will be essential for building our case. The next morning, I sent my father a registered letter requesting a meeting to discuss the family situation. I kept the tone neutral and professional, following Sarah Kim's advice to avoid any language that could be construed as threatening or accusatory. The letter simply stated that I had questions about recent business filings and hoped we could resolve our family misunderstanding through honest conversation. Dad called me within hours of receiving the letter. His voice sounded strained, older than I remembered. Savannah, we need to talk, but not at the house. Meet me at Murphy's Diner on Route 12 tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Come alone. Murphy's Diner was where Dad used to take me for pancakes after my mother's chemotherapy appointments. The choice of location felt significant, like he was trying to reconnect with the father he used to be before Margaret's influence took over. I arrived early and chose a corner booth with clear sightlines to the entrance. Dad walked in exactly at 10, looking around nervously before spotting me. He had aged years in the past month. His hair was grayer, his shoulders slumped, and his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety. Dad, thank you for meeting me. I know things have been complicated lately. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately started talking in a low, urgent voice. Savannah, you have to stop this investigation. Margaret knows about the lawyers. She knows about your meetings with prosecutors. She is not going to let this go quietly. How does she know about my meetings? She has connections, people who keep her informed about legal filings and court activities. She knows you have been building a case against her. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had been monitoring my activities. She probably knew about my conversations with Rebecca Morrison and Sarah Kim. She might even know about this meeting with Dad. Dad, are you in danger? Are you here because she told you to come? He looked around the diner nervously. I am here because I need to warn you. Margaret is not just stealing money, Savannah. She is planning something much worse. She has been researching ways to have you declared mentally incompetent. She wants to get a court order that would give her control over any financial claims you might make against the family estate. That is insane. You cannot have someone declared incompetent just because they challenge your financial crimes. You can if you have the right medical professionals willing to sign the paperwork. Margaret has been talking to psychiatrists about your delusional behavior and your obsession with conspiracy theories. She has been building a case that you are having a mental health crisis brought on by family stress. I felt the walls of the diner closing in around me. Margaret was not just stealing money. She was trying to destroy my legal standing to challenge her theft. If she succeeded in having me declared incompetent, any evidence I had gathered would be dismissed as the delusions of someone with mental health issues. Dad, you have to help me stop this. You know I am not mentally ill. You know Margaret is lying about everything. His hands shook as he reached across the table and took mine. Savannah, I do not know what is true anymore. Margaret has documents that show you accessing business accounts. She has bank records that show money being transferred to accounts with your name on them. Maybe you do not remember doing it. Maybe you are sick and you need help. The betrayal was complete. Margaret had not just stolen my inheritance. She had convinced my own father that I was mentally ill and possibly criminal. She had turned him into an unwitting accomplice in her scheme to discredit me. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated how thoroughly I would investigate her crimes. and she had overestimated my father's loyalty to her over his own daughter. Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to prove that Margaret forged those documents. I am going to prove that she stole money from our family trust. And I am going to prove that Gerald Henderson helped her commit these crimes. When I do, you are going to have to choose whether you stand with her or with the truth. I left him sitting in the diner, staring into his coffee cup like it contained answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Walking away from my father felt like closing a door I might never be able to open again. But Margaret's threat to have me declared mentally incompetent had changed the stakes completely. This was no longer just about money or inheritance. This was about my freedom, my reputation, and my ability to live an independent life. I called Rebecca Morrison from the diner parking lot and explained what my father had told me about Margaret's new strategy. "Savannah, we need to move faster than we originally planned. If Margaret files a mental competency petition, it could complicate our criminal case. Even if the petition fails, it will muddy the waters and give defense attorneys ammunition to discredit your testimony." What do we do? We build an unshakable coalition of witnesses and evidence. We need people who can testify to your mental competency, your honest character, and Margaret's history of manipulative behavior. We need financial experts who can trace every fraudulent transaction. And we need to find other victims of Gerald Henderson's document fraud scheme. Rebecca's plan was comprehensive and aggressive. Step 1 involved contacting every family member, family friend, and business associate who might have relevant information about Margaret's financial activities. Step 2 required hiring a forensic accountant to trace the movement of money through the various business entities Margaret had created. Step 3 meant reaching out to Gerald Henderson's former clients to identify patterns of document manipulation. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, called me 3 days after my meeting with Dad. Patricia lived in California and only visited family during major holidays, but she had stayed in touch with our family's financial situation because she was a co-trustee of my grandfather's estate. "Savannah, your father called me yesterday. He sounded terrible. He asked me to sign some papers transferring my share of Grandpa's estate to Margaret's new company." When I asked him why, he could not give me a straight answer. "Aunt Patricia, please do not sign anything. Margaret has been forging documents and stealing from the family trust. I have lawyers involved now." I was afraid something like this was happening. Margaret called me 6 months ago asking detailed questions about the family trust structure. She wanted to know about property values, business partnerships, inheritance schedules. At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand the family finances. Now I realize she was planning this theft. Aunt Patricia agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation. More importantly, she had copies of original trust documents that predated Margaret's marriage to my father. These documents clearly showed the intended distribution of family assets, and they contradicted every claim Margaret had made about my supposed theft or willing disinheritance. The second breakthrough came from Rebecca's investigation into Gerald Henderson's client list. She discovered that Henderson had been involved in at least 12 similar cases over the past 5 years. Elderly clients would consult him about estate planning, then discover months later that their assets had been transferred to unexpected beneficiaries through documents they did not remember signing. "Savannah, we found Henderson's smoking gun. A former paralegal in his office kept copies of draft documents that show the before and after versions. Henderson would have clients sign legitimate estate planning documents, then alter the contents after the fact. He has been running this scam for years." Rebecca introduced me to Maria Santos, a widow whose late husband's estate had been stolen through Henderson's document fraud scheme. Maria had been fighting the case for 3 years, but she had not been able to prove the documents were altered because she did not have the kind of notary evidence that I possessed. "Mrs. Rivers, I am so glad you came forward. I thought I was going crazy. My husband and I had clear agreements about our estate planning, but after he died, suddenly, there were documents that gave everything to his business partner. Gerald Henderson kept telling me I was remembering things incorrectly because of grief. Maria's case had striking similarities to my situation. Henderson had used the same tactics, legitimate initial documents, post-signing alterations, and gaslighting victims who questioned the discrepancies. But Maria had something I needed: financial records that showed exactly how Henderson and his co-conspirators moved stolen assets through shell companies and offshore accounts. Maria, would you be willing to join forces with our case? Your financial evidence, combined with my notary proof, could give prosecutors everything they need to shut down Henderson's entire operation. Absolutely. I want to see that man in prison. Rebecca arranged a meeting between Maria, myself, prosecutor Sarah Kim, and forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer had worked on several high-profile fraud cases, and she specialized in tracing money through complex corporate structures designed to hide criminal activity. Jennifer's analysis of Margaret's financial activities was devastating. Over the past 18 months, Margaret had systematically moved family trust assets into accounts controlled by her limited liability company. The transfers were structured to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems used by banks and government agencies. Each individual transaction was small enough to fly under the radar, but collectively, she had stolen over $800,000 from my family. Mrs. Rivers, your stepmother is not an amateur. This level of financial sophistication suggests she has done this before, probably with previous marriages or business partnerships. We need to investigate her background more thoroughly. Sarah Kim assigned a detective to research Margaret's history. Within a week, they discovered that Margaret had been married twice before her relationship with my father. Both previous marriages had ended in contentious divorces involving allegations of financial impropriety. In her first marriage, Margaret had been accused of hiding assets during divorce proceedings. In her second marriage, she had been sued by her late husband's children for allegedly manipulating him into changing his will while he was suffering from early-stage dementia. Savannah Margaret is a professional predator. She targets older men with significant assets and vulnerable family dynamics. Your father was not her first victim, and if we do not stop her, he will not be her last. But the most shocking discovery came from Jennifer's analysis of Gerald Henderson's client database. Henderson had represented Margaret during her second divorce 7 years before she met my father. Their relationship was not a recent attorney-client connection. They had been working together for years, probably planning my father's financial destruction from the moment Margaret started dating him. This was a long-term conspiracy, Savannah. Margaret and Henderson identified your father as a target, developed a relationship with him, gained his trust, and then systematically positioned themselves to steal his assets. Your father is not a co-conspirator. He is a victim of an elaborate romance scam. The revelation changed everything. My anger at Dad for betraying me transformed into sympathy for an elderly man who had been manipulated by professional criminals. Margaret had not just married him for love or companionship. She had married him as part of a calculated plan to steal his life savings. Armed with this evidence, Sarah Kim felt confident enough to approach Margaret directly. The plan was to offer her a plea agreement in exchange for cooperation against Gerald Henderson. If Margaret refused to cooperate, we would proceed with a full prosecution that would likely result in significant prison time for both conspirators. Savannah, I want you to understand what is about to happen. When we confront Margaret with this evidence, she is going to fight back aggressively. She might try to accelerate her plan to have you declared mentally incompetent. She might try to intimidate your father into supporting her version of events. She might even try to flee the jurisdiction with whatever assets she can liquidate quickly. What can I do to protect myself? Document everything. Record every conversation you can legally record. Stay in public places when meeting with family members. And most importantly, do not let her provoke you into doing anything that could be used to support claims about your mental state. That evening, I called my grandmother to warn her about what was coming. Nana Williams had been my strongest supporter throughout childhood, but Margaret's lies had shaken her faith in me. I hoped that explaining the criminal investigation might help her understand the true situation. Nana, I need you to listen carefully. Margaret did not just lie about me stealing money. She actually stole money from our family, and she forged documents to cover up her crimes. The prosecutors have evidence. This is not a family disagreement anymore. This is a criminal case. Oh, sweetheart. I have been so confused. Margaret showed me bank statements with your name on them. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. You have never been dishonest about anything in your entire life. Nana Margaret is not who we thought she was. She has done this to other families before. She and Dad's lawyer have been planning this theft for years. Dad is a victim too, even though he does not understand it yet. What can I do to help? I need you to gather any financial documents you have related to Grandpa's estate and the family trust. Margaret has been trying to get control of your cottage, but those transfers are not legal because they were based on forged documents. Savannah there is something else. Margaret came to see me last week. She offered to buy my cottage for $50,000. She said it was a generous offer because the property needed so much work. But your grandfather built that cottage in 1958. The land alone is worth more than $50,000. Margaret was accelerating her timeline. She was trying to acquire remaining family assets through lowball purchases from elderly family members who trusted her false narrative about financial necessity. This was not just document fraud. This was systematic financial elder abuse. Nana, do not sign anything Margaret gives you. Do not accept any money from her. And if she pressures you or threatens you in any way, call me immediately. I understand, sweetheart. And Savannah, I am sorry I doubted you. I should have known better. The next morning, Sarah Kim called with news that changed the entire trajectory of our case. Savannah Gerald Henderson's office was raided by federal agents yesterday evening. They found evidence of an organized document fraud scheme involving dozens of clients across 3 states. Henderson has been arrested on federal charges. Margaret's name is all over his client files. The net was closing around Margaret, but I knew she would not surrender quietly. Professional predators do not give up when cornered. They escalate and they fight dirty. I was about to learn exactly how dirty Margaret was willing to fight. Henderson's arrest should have been our moment of victory, but Margaret was far from finished. 3 days after the federal raid, I received a call that shattered my confidence in everything we had built. Savannah, this is Detective Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Office. We need you to come in for questioning regarding allegations of harassment and stalking made against you by Margaret Rivers. My blood turned to ice. Harassment, what are you talking about? Mrs. Rivers claims you have been following her, making threatening phone calls and attempting to intimidate family members into supporting false accusations against her. She has filed a restraining order petition, and she has security camera footage that allegedly shows you stalking her residence. This was Margaret's counterstrike. While we had been building our criminal case, she had been building a case to portray me as an unstable, vindictive family member who was harassing innocent people. If she succeeded in getting a restraining order, it would severely limit my ability to gather evidence or communicate with family members. I called Rebecca Morrison immediately. Rebecca, Margaret is claiming I have been stalking her. This has to be fabricated evidence, but I need legal representation for the restraining order hearing. Savannah, this is exactly what we expected. Margaret is trying to flip the narrative and make you look like the aggressor. Do not panic. We will fight this, but you need to be extremely careful about your actions over the next few days. Any contact with Margaret or her property could be used against you. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing my calendar and phone records to build an alibi for every alleged stalking incident Margaret had reported. Most of her claims were easily disprovable because I had been at work or with other people during the times she claimed I was harassing her. But then Maria Santos called with devastating news. Savannah, I cannot continue working with your legal team. My attorney has advised me that associating with your case could hurt my own lawsuit against Gerald Henderson. He thinks your family drama is too controversial and could make me look unstable by association. Maria, we talked about this. Our cases are stronger together. The evidence we have gathered proves Henderson's pattern of document fraud across multiple victims. I know, but my attorney says the harassment charges against you change everything. He thinks I should distance myself from your case until your legal troubles are resolved. I am sorry, but I have to protect my own interests. Maria's defection was a crushing blow. She had been our key witness for Henderson's broader fraud scheme. Without her testimony, our case became much narrower, focusing only on the specific crimes against my family, rather than Henderson's systematic criminal enterprise. Worse, Maria's withdrawal validated Margaret's strategy of portraying me as an unstable troublemaker. If other victims of Henderson's fraud were afraid to associate with me, it suggested that Margaret's harassment allegations might have merit. The restraining order hearing became a nightmare of twisted facts and manufactured evidence. Margaret appeared in court with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Shaw, who specialized in domestic relations cases. Margaret had transformed her appearance for court wearing conservative clothing and minimal makeup that made her look older and more vulnerable. Your Honor, my client has endured months of harassment from her stepdaughter, who refuses to accept that she is not entitled to inherit family assets. Ms. Rivers has made threatening phone calls, followed my client to grocery stores and medical appointments, and has attempted to turn family members against her with wild conspiracy theories. Shaw presented security camera footage from a grocery store that showed someone who looked like me following Margaret through the aisles. The timestamp indicated this had occurred on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be at work. My attorney, David Kumar, challenged the evidence aggressively. Your Honor, this footage is grainy and unclear. There is no definitive proof that the person in this video is my client. Furthermore, my client has time-stamped evidence that she was at her workplace during the alleged incident. But the damage was done. The footage looked convincing, even if it was not actually me. Combined with Margaret's tearful testimony about feeling unsafe in her own home, it created a compelling narrative of harassment and intimidation. The judge granted a temporary restraining order that prohibited me from contacting Margaret directly approaching her residence or communicating with my father and half-sisters, except through attorneys. The order effectively cut me off from my own family and severely limited my ability to gather evidence for the criminal case. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt completely defeated. Margaret had managed to isolate me from key witnesses, limit my access to family members, and create a legal narrative that portrayed me as an unstable aggressor rather than a victim of financial fraud. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. That evening, my father called me for the first time since our meeting at Murphy's Diner. Savannah, I need you to stop this legal action against Margaret. She is not the person you think she is. She has been trying to protect our family from your increasingly erratic behavior. Dad, what are you talking about? Margaret has been stealing from us. The prosecutors have evidence of document fraud and financial crimes. Sweetheart, Margaret showed me the security footage of you following her. She showed me records of threatening phone calls from your number. I think you might be having some kind of breakdown, and you need professional help. The conversation continued for 20 minutes with my father, becoming increasingly convinced that I was suffering from mental health issues that were causing me to create elaborate conspiracy theories about Margaret's innocence. By the end of the call, he had agreed to sign an affidavit supporting Margaret's claims about my harassment and unstable behavior. Margaret had not just stolen my inheritance. She had stolen my father's ability to recognize the truth about his own daughter. Her manipulation was so complete that he genuinely believed I was mentally ill and potentially dangerous. Hanging up the phone, I realized that Margaret had succeeded in isolating me from everyone who might have supported my case. Maria had abandoned our alliance. My father had become her ally. The restraining order prevented me from reaching out to other family members. I was completely alone, facing criminal defendants with unlimited resources and a legal system that was beginning to view me as an unreliable accuser. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if Margaret might actually win. Just when I thought Margaret had checkmated me completely, salvation came from the most unexpected source. 2 days after the restraining order hearing, I received a call from someone I had never met, but who would change everything. Ms. Rivers, this is Dr. Amanda Foster. I am a forensic psychiatrist who specializes in elder abuse cases. I have been following your situation through the prosecutor's office, and I need to meet with you immediately. Dr. Foster's office was in the medical district downtown, a sterile environment that felt appropriate for the clinical precision she brought to our conversation. Savannah, I have reviewed all the court filings related to your case, including the restraining order petition and the harassment allegations. I want you to know that everything Margaret has done follows a textbook pattern of psychological manipulation used by financial predators who target families. What do you mean? Margaret is using a technique called DARVO, Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender. She denies the financial crimes attacks your credibility and reverses the situation to make you appear to be the aggressor while she poses as the victim. It is a sophisticated psychological warfare strategy. Dr. Foster explained that she had been consulting with the FBI on cases involving organized fraud schemes that targeted elderly victims. Margaret's pattern of behavior matched profiles they had developed for professional romance scammers who specialized in long-term financial manipulation. Savannah, that security camera footage from the grocery store, I believe it shows Margaret's daughter Emma, not you. The height, build, and hair color match Emma perfectly. Margaret coached her daughter to dress like you and follow her through the store, then used the footage to support her harassment claims. The revelation was staggering. Margaret had not just manipulated my father and stolen from our family. She had involved her own daughter in creating fabricated evidence to frame me for stalking. The level of calculated deception was beyond anything I had imagined. Dr. Foster, can you prove Emma was the person in that footage? We can try. I have contacts in digital forensics who specialize in video analysis. More importantly, I have been building a comprehensive psychological profile of Margaret's behavior patterns. When this case goes to trial, I can testify that her actions are consistent with organized financial predatory behavior, not the innocent reactions of someone being genuinely harassed. Dr. Foster's involvement immediately strengthened our case, but she brought even more valuable assistance. She had been working with a private investigator named James Wright, who specialized in financial crimes involving elder abuse. James had been tracking Gerald Henderson's activities for over a year as part of a federal investigation into organized fraud networks. Savannah, Gerald Henderson is not just a corrupt lawyer. He is part of a larger criminal enterprise that identifies wealthy elderly targets, connects them with romance scammers like Margaret, and then systematically steals their assets through forged legal documents. Your case is not an isolated incident. It is part of a federal investigation into organized crime. James Wright had access to Henderson's seized computer files, which contained detailed communications between Henderson and Margaret dating back 6 years. The emails showed that Margaret had been reporting on my father's financial status, family relationships, and potential vulnerabilities long before she married him. Margaret was essentially a spy gathering intelligence about your family's assets and planning the theft years in advance. Henderson's files show that they had backup plans for multiple scenarios, including contingencies for dealing with suspicious family members who might challenge their schemes. The most damning evidence came from Henderson's financial records, which showed regular payments to Margaret for consulting services that predated her marriage to my father by 3 years. Margaret had been receiving money from Henderson while dating Dad, essentially being paid to infiltrate our family and gather information for future theft. James, does this mean Margaret never actually loved my father? Their entire relationship was a criminal conspiracy. I am afraid so. The email communications between Margaret and Henderson discuss your father in purely financial terms. They refer to him as Target 7 and analyze his assets like a business acquisition. There is no evidence of genuine emotional attachment in any of their correspondence. This evidence completely transformed our legal strategy. Instead of defending against Margaret's harassment allegations, we could now prove that she was part of an organized criminal enterprise that had systematically targeted my father for financial exploitation. The harassment charges against me became obviously fabricated when viewed as part of a larger pattern of criminal deception. Sarah Kim was ecstatic when she reviewed the new evidence. Savannah, this changes everything. We are no longer prosecuting simple document fraud. We are prosecuting organized crime. Margaret and Henderson will be facing federal charges under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. We are talking about 20-year prison sentences. But the most personally satisfying evidence came from James Wright's analysis of the financial transactions. Henderson's records showed exactly how they had planned to dispose of stolen assets once the theft was complete. Margaret was supposed to receive 30% of stolen funds. Henderson would keep 20%, and the remaining 50% would be transferred to offshore accounts controlled by their criminal network. Savannah, Margaret was planning to abandon your father once the theft was complete. Henderson's emails discuss timeline for Margaret to initiate divorce proceedings and disappear with her share of the stolen money. Your father was never meant to be her permanent partner. He was always intended to be a temporary victim. James Wright arranged for Dr. Foster and me to meet with FBI agent Lisa Chang, who was leading the federal investigation into Henderson's criminal network. Agent Chang had been building cases against romance scammers and corrupt attorneys for 5 years, but she had never been able to access the kind of detailed documentation that my notary records provided. Ms. Rivers, your evidence gives us everything we need to shut down an entire criminal organization. Henderson's network has been operating for at least 8 years, targeting elderly victims across multiple states. We estimate they have stolen over $12 million from families like yours. Agent Chang explained that federal prosecutors would be taking over the case from local authorities. Margaret and Henderson would face charges including mail fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, and racketeering. The penalties for these federal crimes were severe enough that both defendants would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison. Agent Chang, what happens to my father Will? He faced charges for his involvement. Your father is clearly a victim, not a co-conspirator. The evidence shows he was systematically manipulated and deceived. We will need his testimony to build our case, but he will not face criminal charges. The federal investigation moved quickly once Agent Chang had access to Henderson's files and my notary evidence. Within 2 weeks, Margaret was arrested at the family home, while my father watched in shock and disbelief. Emma and Sophie were placed in protective custody because they were minors who had been living with someone involved in organized crime. Margaret's arrest was covered by local news media, which meant the entire community learned about the fraud scheme she had orchestrated. The same neighbors who had been treating me with suspicion after Margaret's lies now understood that I had been the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. But the most meaningful vindication came from my father's phone call the evening after Margaret's arrest. Savannah, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I have been such a fool. Margaret showed me forged evidence, manipulated my emotions, and convinced me that my own daughter was mentally ill and criminal. I do not know how I will ever forgive myself for doubting you. Dad, Margaret is a professional manipulator. She had years to plan this deception, and she had help from experienced criminals. You are not foolish. You were targeted by experts. Can you ever forgive me for not believing you, for not protecting you when you needed me most? The conversation was painful but healing. My father was finally beginning to understand the extent of Margaret's manipulation and his own vulnerability to professional predators who specialize in exploiting trust and emotional attachment. The federal trial of Margaret Williams and Gerald Henderson became one of the most significant financial crime prosecutions in our state's history. The case took 8 months to reach trial, but when it did, the evidence was overwhelming and the verdict was swift. Margaret and Henderson were convicted on all charges: racketeering, elder abuse, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Margaret received a 25-year federal prison sentence. Henderson received 30 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution totaling over $2 million to their victims. The trial revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Over 8 years, they had targeted 17 elderly victims across 6 states, stealing a total of $14.7 million through forged documents and manipulated relationships. My family was just one of many that had been systematically destroyed by their organized crime network. During the sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to address the court about the impact of Margaret's crimes on our family. Your Honor, Margaret Williams did not just steal money from my family. She stole trust, relationships, and sense of security that can never be fully restored. She convinced my father to doubt his own daughter. She turned family members against each other with elaborate lies. She weaponized love and trust to commit crimes that destroyed not just financial assets, but emotional bonds that took decades to build. Margaret showed no remorse during the sentencing hearing. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence of her crimes, she maintained that she was innocent and claimed that she was being persecuted by vindictive family members who resented her marriage to my father. Her complete lack of accountability made it clear that prison was the only appropriate consequence for her actions. The restitution process took another 6 months, but eventually our family recovered most of the stolen assets. My grandmother's cottage was returned to her name. The family trust was restored to its original structure. Dad's business assets were recovered from the shell companies Margaret had created. But the most important restoration was not financial. It was the rebuilding of family relationships that had been damaged by Margaret's manipulation. My father and I spent months in family counseling, working through the trauma of betrayal and manipulation we had both experienced. Dr. Foster helped us understand how professional predators like Margaret exploit normal family dynamics to create division and mistrust. Savannah, your father was not weak or stupid for falling victim to Margaret's manipulation. She used sophisticated psychological techniques that are designed to exploit the basic human needs for love, companionship, and security. Recognizing these techniques helps protect against future manipulation. Dad struggled with guilt and shame about his role in Margaret's scheme, but eventually he began to understand that he was a victim rather than a co-conspirator. The therapy helped him rebuild his confidence and his ability to trust his own judgment about people and relationships. Emma and Sophie faced their own challenges, adjusting to the reality that their mother was a professional criminal who had used them as tools in her fraud schemes. Dad gained full custody of both girls, and they moved in with him permanently. Building relationships with my half-sisters required patience and understanding, but eventually we developed genuine bonds based on honesty rather than manipulation. My grandmother became one of my strongest supporters throughout the legal process. The experience of nearly losing her cottage to Margaret's theft made her fiercely protective of family assets and relationships. She turned her cottage into a gathering place for family celebrations and healing conversations. Savannah, this experience taught me that family is not just about blood relationships. It is about choosing to support and protect each other, especially when facing external threats. You chose to fight for this family when it would have been easier to walk away. That makes you the strongest family member of all. The legal victory also connected me with other victims of financial fraud who needed support and advocacy. I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helps families recover from elder abuse and financial crimes. My experience navigating the legal system became valuable knowledge that I could share with other victims who felt overwhelmed by the complexity of fraud prosecutions. Dr. Foster invited me to speak at conferences about financial predators and family manipulation. Sharing my story publicly helped other families recognize warning signs of romance scams and document fraud before becoming victims themselves. Survivors like you help educate communities about these crimes and potentially prevent future victimization. Your willingness to speak publicly about your experience is part of the healing process for both yourself and other potential victims. Most importantly, this experience taught me that family is ultimately about choice rather than genetics. Margaret had been legally part of our family for 15 years, but she was never truly committed to our well-being. Meanwhile, people like Dr. Foster Rebecca Morrison, Sarah Kim, and Agent Chang became chosen family members who supported me through the most difficult period of my life. The people who stand with you during crisis, who fight for truth and justice alongside you, who refuse to abandon you when things get complicated. Those are the people who deserve to be called family, regardless of their legal or genetic relationship to you. Today, 3 years after Margaret's conviction, our family has rebuilt itself around honesty, transparency, and mutual support. Dad has learned to be more cautious about romantic relationships while remaining open to genuine companionship. Emma and Sophie are thriving in school and have developed healthy skepticism about people who make promises that seem too good to be true. My grandmother continues to be our family's wisdom keeper and gathering coordinator. As for me, I learned that fighting for truth and justice is never easy, but it is always worthwhile. Standing up to powerful people who abuse trust requires courage, persistence, and strong allies. But when you succeed in exposing lies and protecting vulnerable people, the victory belongs not just to you, but to everyone who supported your fight. So here is my question for you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal, where someone you trusted turned out to be manipulating you for personal gain? How do you rebuild trust after discovering that family members have been working against your best interests? Share your thoughts in the comments, because these stories of family justice and karma help all of us recognize manipulation and protect ourselves from predators who target families. If this story of family revenge and justice served cold resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about standing up to family manipulation and fighting for what is right. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that fighting for truth is always worth it, even when the people you love do not initially believe you. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes the family you choose to build is stronger than the family you were born into. Keep fighting for truth, keep protecting vulnerable people, and never let manipulators convince you that you are crazy for recognizing their lies.